My name is Daniel Mercer. I have worked as a ranger in the Appalachian region for just over 11 years, assigned to a small, understaffed station that sits between two long-forgotten service roads and a stretch of forest most hikers never reach. The station is old, built in the late 1950s. Reinforced concrete on the outside with a timber interior that holds the cold in winter and the damp year-round. On paper, it exists to monitor trail conditions and serve as a relay point during emergencies. In practice, it is a place where radios hum to themselves and paperwork piles up faster than visitors arrive. The day everything happened began like any other shift. I signed in at 6:40, logged the weather, low cloud cover, light fog in the hollows, no precipitation, and ran a standard equipment check. The radio worked. The generator kicked on without complaint. The exterior cameras, 3 of them, showed nothing but empty gravel and trees standing still in the early morning air. I brewed coffee, sat at my desk, and listened to the forest wake up. By mid-morning, the fog had thinned but never fully lifted. It clung to the tree line like smoke that had forgotten how to move. I spent the first half of the day responding to routine calls. A downed limb reported by a maintenance crew miles away. A hiker asking about trail closures that hadn't existed for years. A brief check-in from a ranger station north of me, confirming they'd lost signal for about 10 minutes and regained it without explanation. That last one stood out, but not enough to alarm me. Signal interference happens out there. The mountains bend sound and radio waves in ways that still surprise people. Just after noon, I noticed something odd in the station logbook. I hadn't written it. There was a new entry, time-stamped 11:58, written in my handwriting or close enough to unsettle me. It noted a walk-up contact. No name provided, no details filled in, just the phrase recorded neatly on a line that should have been blank. I checked my watch. It was 12:14. I had not left my desk in over an hour. I told myself it was a mistake. Fatigue. Muscle memory. I crossed the line out and initialed the correction, then stood and did a slow walk through the station to clear my head. The building creaked softly as it always did, would adjusting to temperature shifts, metal ticking as the generator settled into a steady rhythm. Nothing was out of place. At 12:27, the exterior motion sensor tripped. That, in itself, wasn't unusual. Deer wander close sometimes, especially when the fog keeps them calm. I glanced at the monitor, expecting to see a pale shape moving through the trees. The camera showed someone standing at the edge of the gravel lot. They were tall. Too tall, I thought at first, but then realized it was the perspective playing tricks on me. The figure stood just beyond the reach of the camera's depth markers, close enough that details should have been clear. Instead, everything about them seemed slightly out of focus, as if the lens couldn't agree on where to settle. They didn't move. I watched for nearly a minute, waiting for some small shift, weight from one foot to another, a turn of the head. Anything. Nothing happened. The fog curled around their legs, never quite touching them, like water flowing around a stone. I picked up the radio and called out the standard greeting for visitor contact, my voice steady out of habit. No response came back. When I looked up again, the figure was closer. I hadn't seen them walk. They were now standing at the bottom of the station steps, just out of view of the camera mounted above the door. I felt a tightness settle in my chest, the kind that comes when your body notices something your mind hasn't caught up to yet. I reminded myself of procedure. I stood, adjusted my uniform, and approached the door, stopping short of opening it. Through the reinforced glass, I could see the top of their head. It was level with the upper frame. No one in this region was built like that. I cleared my throat and announced myself again, stating my name and role, asking if they needed assistance. The words sounded thin in the air, swallowed quickly by the quiet outside. There was a pause. Then something spoke. It used my voice. Not a recording, Not an echo. My voice, shaped exactly as it had sounded moments before, repeating my introduction with a slight delay, like someone reading from a script they didn't understand. The cadence was wrong. The pauses fell in the wrong places. When it said my name, it lingered on the last syllable, stretching it longer than any human would. I stepped back from the door without realizing I was moving. The radio on my desk crackled to life behind me, unprompted, and broadcast the same words again, layered over themselves, softer this time, as if coming from a distance. Outside, something knocked. Just once. Slow. Deliberate. Not a hand. I did not open the door. I logged the time instead, hands shaking as I wrote, because training tells you to document what you don't understand. Because a record means you didn't imagine it. Because part of me already knew this was not a visitor I could help. I remained where I was for several seconds after the knock, listening for any sound that might explain it. Wind against the siding, a branch shifting, the slow exhale of someone catching their breath. None of that came. The forest outside the station went quiet in a way that felt deliberate, as if everything living had agreed to stop at once. I backed away from the door and returned to the desk, keeping my eyes on the reinforced glass the entire time. Training says to maintain visual contact when you're unsure about a situation, but something about looking directly at that doorway made my skin crawl. I compromised by watching the camera feed instead. The exterior monitor flickered, then stabilized. The figure stood exactly where it had been before the knock. No closer, no farther, just there. I picked up the radio again and attempted to contact the regional office. My first call went unanswered. The second produced only static. On the third try, a voice came through, but it wasn't dispatch. It was my own, low and distorted, repeating my call sign back to me, each repetition slightly slower than the last. I shut the radio off. The silence that followed felt heavier than the noise had. I realized then that I could hear something else beneath it. A faint, rhythmic sound coming from outside. Not footsteps, not breathing. It reminded me of fabric being pulled slowly across rough wood. I looked back at the door. A shadow passed across the glass, tall and narrow, sliding from one side to the other without any visible source. The shadow paused, then reversed direction, as if whoever or whatever was outside was studying the shape of the building rather than the door itself. I forced myself to speak, keeping my voice level, announcing again that the station was closed to walk-up visitors and that assistance would be provided through official channels only. The words felt rehearsed and hollow, but saying them gave me something to hold on to. The response came immediately. This time it didn't use my voice. It sounded like several voices layered together, all attempting the same sentence and failing. The words blurred into each other, rising and falling out of sync, but I caught fragments that made my stomach drop. My name, the phrase "come outside," the word "cold," repeated twice, softly, almost apologetically. The handle on the door moved. Not a turn, not a pull. It flexed downward, slowly, far past the point any human wrist could manage, metal bending just enough to groan in protest. I stepped back again, heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. The handle returned to its original position with a sharp snap, as if released. Then came the knock again. This time it wasn't singular. 3 slow impacts, evenly spaced, too measured to be accidental. The sound traveled through the door and into the walls, vibrating the framed certificates behind my desk. I felt it in the floor beneath my boots. I retreated to the back room, where the emergency equipment and spare radios were kept, and shut the interior door behind me. It was a thin barrier, but it broke the line of sight, and that mattered more than I wanted to admit. I grabbed the satellite phone from its case and tried to establish a connection. The screen lit up, searching for signal, then froze. The lights flickered, just once. When they steadied, I realized the rhythmic sound outside had stopped. I waited, counting my breaths, listening for any indication of movement. After nearly a minute, I edged back toward the main room, moving quietly, every sense stretched thin. I stopped short when I saw the logbook on the desk. It was open. A new entry had been written beneath the one I'd crossed out earlier. The handwriting was careful, deliberate, each letter formed slowly, as if by someone unfamiliar with the act of writing. The timestamp read 12:46. The note said, "Contact established. Subject remains inside." I stared at the words until they blurred. My watch read 12:49. I had not left the back room long enough for anyone to enter, even if they could have. The exterior door alarm had not sounded. None of the cameras showed movement. I checked them anyway. The feed from camera 2, the one angled toward the door, was blank. Not static, not darkness, just a flat gray field, as if the lens had been pressed directly against fog. Camera 1 and 3 showed the same thing. I turned slowly toward the door. Something stood on the other side of it. I could see the outline now, pressed close enough that the shape of its head and shoulders were faintly visible through the reinforced glass. It leaned forward slightly, as if listening. Where a face should have been, there was only distortion, the glass bending the view in subtle, nauseating ways. A sound came from directly behind me. My voice again. This time it was whispering. I did not turn around. Every instinct I had told me not to. The whisper behind me was too close, close enough that I could feel the faint movement of air against the back of my neck, as if someone were leaning in to share a secret. My voice shaped the sound, but it carried no breath, no warmth. It spoke my name once, softly, and then went quiet. I focused on the door. The shape behind the glass shifted. Not forward or back, but sideways, sliding just enough for the outline of a shoulder to disappear from view. The pressure against the glass eased, and with it came a strange sense of relief that I immediately distrusted. Whatever was outside no longer needed to press itself against the barrier. It had learned something. I forced myself to move. Slowly, deliberately, I turned until my back was against the desk, keeping the entire room in view. There was nothing behind me, no shadow, no figure. The whisper had come from empty air. The radio crackled. I flinched despite myself, then reached out and turned the volume down instead of off. Cutting it entirely felt wrong, like shutting my eyes in the dark. Static filled the room, uneven and pulsing, and beneath it I heard a faint clicking noise, rhythmic and precise, like someone tapping a fingernail against a microphone housing. I called dispatch again. This time someone answered. The relief hit me so hard my knees nearly gave out. The voice on the other end identified herself correctly, used the right call signs, asked me to confirm my location. I answered quickly, too quickly, words tumbling over each other as I explained there was an individual outside the station exhibiting abnormal behavior. There was a pause. Then she asked me to repeat myself. I did, slower this time, choosing my words carefully, sticking to observable facts. As I spoke, the clicking sound grew louder, syncing with my speech, matching the rhythm of my sentences beat for beat. When I finished, the line went quiet. I waited. Finally, dispatch spoke again, but her tone had changed. It was flatter, stripped of inflection, like someone reading from a checklist without understanding it. She asked me if the individual had attempted verbal contact. Before I could answer, another voice cut in over the channel. My voice. It answered for me. Yes, it said. It is learning. The radio screamed with feedback, a high-pitched shriek that sent pain lancing through my skull. I dropped it, clamping my hands over my ears until the sound cut off abruptly, leaving behind a ringing silence. Outside, something laughed. It was a dry, rasping sound, like air dragged through a throat that wasn't meant to make noise. It came from all around the building at once, bouncing off the walls, slipping through cracks I hadn't known were there. I tasted metal and realized I'd bitten my tongue. The laughter stopped as suddenly as it had begun. Then came footsteps, heavy ones. They circled the station slowly, each step deliberate, the weight uneven, as if whatever walked out there wasn't used to carrying its own mass. Gravel crunched, wood creaked as pressure shifted against the outer wall. I tracked the sound as it moved, heart racing, until it reached the back of the building. The emergency exit. The handle rattled. Not violently, not yet. Just a gentle test, like someone checking to see if a door was locked before trying harder. I backed away from it, moving toward the center of the room, putting as much distance between myself and every possible entrance as I could. The lights dimmed. They didn't flicker this time. They simply faded, dropping the room into a dull, gray half-light powered by the backup system. In that muted glow, I noticed something new on the floor near the front door. Footprints. They were wrong. Too long. Too narrow. The impression too deep at the heel and almost non-existent at the toe, as if the weight had been distributed incorrectly. They appeared one by one, forming slowly in the dust on the floor, leading away from the door and into the room. The door had not opened. The footprints stopped a few feet from where I stood. I held my breath, afraid that even the sound of it might draw attention. The air felt colder there, dense and heavy, pressing against my skin. The space at the end of the footprints shimmered faintly, like heat distortion in reverse. Something stood there, not fully, not yet. I could see edges forming, outlines struggling to maintain their shape. It was tall, taller than the doorway had suggested, its proportions subtly wrong. Where its head should have been, the air bent inward, collapsing around an absence that made my eyes ache to look at. It leaned closer and spoke, not in my voice, not in anyone's. "This place remembers you," it said, each word deliberate, carved out of silence. "It knows your shape." The generator coughed once, then fell silent. The room plunged into darkness. In the dark, something reached for me. I felt the movement before I felt the touch. The air shifted, displaced by something large passing close enough that my uniform brushed against it. Cold flooded in immediately, sharp and invasive, like plunging my hands into icy water. I stumbled backward, boots scraping against the floor, arms flailing until my shoulders struck the edge of the desk hard enough to knock the breath from my lungs. I didn't scream. I don't know if that was discipline or shock. In the darkness, sound became distorted. The station no longer felt like a single room but a collection of hollow spaces stacked too close together. I could hear my own breathing echo from places it shouldn't, overlapping itself, arriving back to my ears half a second late. Somewhere nearby, something else was breathing too, shallow and irregular, as if still figuring out the mechanics. I fumbled for my flashlight, fingers numb, dropping it once before managing to switch it on. The beam cut a narrow cone through the dark. It showed the desk, the wall, the empty space where the footprints had ended. Nothing stood there. The relief was immediate and short-lived. The light caught movement near the ceiling. I tilted the beam upward and froze. Whatever had come into the room was no longer on the floor. It clung to the upper corner where the wall met the ceiling, its shape folded in on itself at angles that made no anatomical sense. Long limbs, too many of them, or perhaps the same ones bent and reused, pressed against the surfaces without visible strain. It did not grip. It adhered as if gravity were optional. The flashlight beam slid across its surface and failed to define it properly. Parts of it absorbed the light completely. Other parts reflected it dully, like wet bark or old leather. There were impressions where a face might have been, but they shifted constantly, features forming and collapsing as if undecided. Turned its attention toward the light. I felt that attention like pressure behind my eyes. My radio clicked on by itself. From the speaker came a low murmur, not quite words, layered voices speaking out of sync. As the thing above me moved, the sounds changed, adjusting pitch and rhythm, testing combinations. When it brushed one limb against the ceiling, the radio matched the motion with a scraping sound. I backed away slowly, keeping the beam trained on it. Every step felt dangerously loud. The thing's head, or what passed for one, tilted, mimicking the angle of my flashlight, studying the way illumination shaped the room. Then it dropped, not fell, dropped like something deciding to be elsewhere. It landed silently behind me. I knew because the cold surged again, wrapping around my legs, my spine, my chest, constricting until it felt difficult to inhale. The flashlight beam shook as I spun, catching only empty space and the open doorway to the back room. Something brushed my arm. Not skin, not fabric. It felt like pressure without texture, like walking through dense fog that resisted movement. Where it touched me, my arm went numb instantly, pins and needles radiating outward. Spoke again, closer this time. "You stay," it said, the words more confident now. Less effort behind them. "Others do." I bolted. Training broke completely in that moment. I ran for the back room, slamming the door behind me and throwing my weight against it, just as something struck the other side. The impact rattled the hinges, dust shaking loose from the frame. I braced my feet and pushed back, heart pounding so hard I thought I might black out. The door bowed inward slightly, not from force, from pressure. The surface of the door began to deform, the wood grain rippling as if something were pressing through it without breaking it, testing how far it could intrude. The handle twisted, metal whining under strain, and then stopped. Silence followed. I stayed there, shaking, muscles burning, waiting for the next impact. None came. After several seconds, I realized I could hear something else. Movement farther away, retreating footsteps that didn't crunch gravel or creak wood, but produced a dull, sucking sound, like boots being pulled free from thick mud. The pressure against the door eased. Slowly, carefully, I stepped back. The back room lights flickered on, dim but functional. The emergency radio on the wall crackled with incoming signal. I rushed to it and answered without waiting for a call sign. Dispatch came through, clear and sharp, voices overlapping as multiple operators spoke at once. They told me they had lost my signal for several minutes. They asked if I was safe. They asked if there had been a breach. I answered yes to everything. As I spoke, I noticed something carved into the inside of the backroom door. It hadn't been there before. The words were shallow but precise, cut into the wood as if by something dull and patient. I traced them with my eyes, stomach sinking as I read. "Inside is warm. Behind the door, something shifted. Not trying to get in. Listening." I didn't open the door. I stood a few feet back from it, radio pressed tight to my ear, listening to dispatch repeat my name until I answered again. My voice sounded wrong to me, thin, brittle, like it might crack apart mid-sentence, but it was mine. That mattered more than it should have. They told me backup was being coordinated, that the nearest unit was over an hour away by road and longer on foot. Weather and terrain were slowing everything. They instructed me to remain inside, secure the station, and report any further contact. I almost laughed at that. I told them something was already inside the building. I did not say what it was. I stuck to facts. Unexplained intrusion, structural anomalies, auditory mimicry, loss of power. The words felt inadequate, like trying to describe a wildfire by listing temperatures. There was another pause on the line. Dispatch asked me to confirm whether I was alone. I hesitated. "I believe so," I said carefully. That answer satisfied no one, including me. While I stayed on the line, I moved deeper into the back room, putting distance between myself and the door. The space was cramped. Shelves stacked with old equipment, emergency rations, weather gear that smelled faintly of mildew. The walls felt closer than they had that morning. The air was warmer here, thick and stale, and I realized with a jolt that the generator should not have been able to restore even partial power on its own. Something else was feeding the system. The radio crackled again, overlapping Dispatch's voice with a faint echo. I turned the volume down slightly, then froze. The echo didn't fade. It continued at the same level, repeating the last thing I'd said in a soft, uncertain tone, like someone practicing speech in another room. The timing was off by just enough to make my skin prickle. Dispatch heard it too. I could tell by the way the operator stopped mid-sentence. They asked me to shut down all electronic devices if possible. I looked around the room. The lights hummed faintly. The radio whispered. Somewhere beyond the wall, I heard slow movement, a dragging sound that traced the perimeter of the back room. Feeling it out. "I can't," I said. "It's already using them." That was the wrong thing to say. The echo on the radio sharpened immediately, repeating my words with clearer articulation. The rhythm improved. The pauses shortened. Whatever was copying me was getting better. Dispatch cut the line without warning. The sudden silence felt like abandonment, but I understood the decision even as panic flared. If the signal was compromised, anything I said could be used. I shut the radio off myself then, hard enough that my hands stung. The whispering stopped. So did the movement. For several seconds, nothing happened. No sound, no vibration, no pressure against the walls. The quiet pressed in, heavy and unnatural, and I realized I could hear my own heartbeat again. I leaned against the shelf, steadying myself, forcing slow breaths. That was when the smell changed. The back room had always smelled like dust and old fabric. Now there was something else layered over it. A damp, mineral scent, like wet stone left too long in the dark. It grew stronger by the second, and with it came a faint warmth, radiating from the wall to my right. I turned slowly. The concrete surface was darkening, moisture seeping through in branching patterns that spread outward like veins. As I watched, the shapes shifted, reorganizing themselves with purpose. They weren't cracks. They were impressions pressing from the other side, testing the boundary the way fingers test ice. A shape formed, not fully but enough. An outline of a hand, elongated and wrong, pressed flat against the wall from within the concrete. The fingers stretched too far, joints bending at unfamiliar angles. The palm slid slightly, leaving behind a darker smear as it moved. I backed away until my shoulders hit the opposite wall. The hand withdrew. In its place, letters began to appear, the moisture darkening into deliberate lines. The words formed slowly, each stroke careful, as if whoever was writing had to remember how. "You know this place," it wrote. The sentence finished, then hesitated. Another line appeared beneath it. "So do I." The lights flickered again, brighter this time, and for a brief, terrifying moment, I saw the entire room reflected in the damp concrete surface. Except I wasn't alone in that reflection. Something stood behind me. I spun around, flashlight up, heart in my throat. There was nothing there. When I turned back, the writing was already fading, moisture soaking deeper into the wall until the words dissolved into meaningless stains. The warmth receded. The air cooled. I slid down the wall and sat on the floor, shaking. I checked my watch. 14:03. Less than 8 hours into my shift. An entire lifetime left. From somewhere in the station, a door opened. Not forced. Not broken. Just opened, slow and polite, hinges creaking softly. Footsteps followed, measured and confident, moving deeper inside. And this time they were headed toward me. I got to my feet on instinct alone. The back room door was still closed. I could see the thin line of light beneath it, steady and unbroken. Whatever door had opened, it wasn't this one. That should have been comforting. It wasn't. The footsteps were inside the station now, past the barriers that were supposed to mean something, moving with the unhurried confidence of someone who already knew the layout. They stopped, not outside the back room, at the desk. I could hear the chair shift, with legs scraping lightly against the floor. Paper rustled. The unmistakable sound of pages being turned filled the space, slow and deliberate. The logbook. It was reading the logbook. I pressed my hand over my mouth to keep my breathing quiet. The air felt thin again, each inhale shallow and unsatisfying. My mind raced through options, none of them good. There was no secondary exit from the back room, no window, no crawl space. The emergency hatch led upward, but the ladder access was in the main room. Between me and it stood something that had already learned my voice. The pages stopped turning. A pen scratched against paper. I knew that sound well. I'd heard it nearly every day for over a decade. Hearing it now, used by something else, made my stomach twist. The footsteps resumed, heavier now, closer. They stopped just outside the back room door. I could see the shadow beneath it, tall and narrow, stretching farther than it should have given the angle of the light. The shadow wavered, edges blurring and sharpening as if struggling to hold still. Then it spoke. "Daniel," it said. My name came out clean this time. No distortion, no delay. If I hadn't known better, I would have sworn it was me on the other side of that door. "You can come out," it continued. "This part is finished." I didn't answer. The silence stretched. I counted my heartbeats, each one loud in my ears. The shadow shifted, lowering slightly, as if whatever stood there was leaning down to bring its face closer to the gap beneath the door. "I know where everything is," it said calmly. "I know what matters." The door handle turned. Not violently, not wrong, perfectly. The latch clicked. The door opened a few inches before I reacted, throwing my weight forward and slamming it shut again. The impact rattled my bones. On the other side, something let out a sound that might have been surprise or irritation. The pressure returned, pushing back against the door, stronger than before but still measured. It wasn't trying to break through. It was testing how much resistance I could offer. "You don't need to hold it," it said. "You always open it." That sentence hit harder than anything else it had said so far. Because it was true. Every morning, every inspection, every knock that came through that door, no matter how tired or distracted I was, I opened it. The station existed to be accessible. I had built habits around that idea, routines so ingrained they felt automatic. It was using that. The pressure eased. The shadow withdrew. Footsteps retreated a short distance, then stopped again. "I'll wait," it said. "You always come back." The light beneath the door dimmed as it moved away. I stayed braced against the wood for a long time after that, muscles screaming, until I was certain the immediate pressure was gone. Even then, I didn't step back. I listened. The station had changed. The sounds were wrong. The building no longer settled naturally. Instead of random creaks and pops, there was a pattern to the noise, slow, intentional movements traveling through walls and floors, as if something were pacing, memorizing the space from the inside out. I slid down the door again, exhaustion crashing over me. My arms shook uncontrollably. I checked my watch with trembling fingers. 15:11. The day was barely half over. I forced myself to think, to plan. Panic would get me nowhere. Whatever this thing was, it was bound to the station somehow. It knew the rules. It knew the routines. Maybe it needed them. Maybe it couldn't act without them. That thought gave me a thin thread of control. I stayed in the back room for nearly 40 minutes. During that time, the station never went quiet. Doors opened and closed softly. Drawers slid in and out. The radio turned itself on once, just long enough for static to spill out before clicking off again. Through it all, I heard no footsteps near the back room. When I finally stood and cracked the door open a fraction, the main room looked normal. Too normal. The lights were fully restored. The desk was neat. Papers stacked. Chair pushed in. The logbook lay open. A pen placed carefully across the page. I scanned the room slowly, flashlight sweeping corners, ceiling, floor. Nothing moved. Nothing breathed. Nothing waited in plain sight. I approached the desk despite every warning in my head and looked down at the open logbook. A new entry had been added. The handwriting was almost perfect now. 15:02. Routine check complete. Station operational. Beneath that, in smaller letters written with less confidence, was a final line. Learning takes time. I snapped the book shut. The radio turned on. My voice came through the speaker, calm and reassuring. "Daniel," it said, "there's still daylight." Outside, the fog began to thicken again, rolling back in fast, swallowing the trees one by one. And somewhere inside the walls, something adjusted its posture, settling in. I did not respond to the radio. I unplugged it. The silence that followed was immediate and absolute, like the station itself had inhaled and was holding its breath. I stood there with the cord still in my hand, waiting for the whisper to continue anyway, waiting for my voice to come from somewhere else. Didn't. That small victory felt fragile, temporary, but I took it. Outside, the fog pressed closer to the windows, thick enough now that the world beyond the glass looked painted on. Trees reduced to vague vertical smears. Daylight still filtered through, but it had lost its warmth. Everything inside the station looked flatter, drained. I made myself move. Staying still had stopped being safe. I began a methodical sweep of the building, flashlight in one hand, the other kept free in case I needed to grab or block. I checked corners first, then doorways, then anything elevated. I avoided mirrors. I don't know when I decided that, but the instinct felt solid. The station felt occupied. Not visibly, not tangibly, but the air resisted me in certain spots, thickening without explanation, like invisible currents I had to push through. In one hallway, my footsteps sounded wrong. Too many echoes, arriving back at me from directions that didn't match the layout. I slowed, adjusted my pace, and the echoes adjusted with me, matching step for step. I stopped walking. The echoes took one more step. I swallowed hard and kept moving, forcing myself not to run. At the supply closet, I found the door already open. Inside, the shelves had been rearranged. Items grouped by size instead of function. Radios placed next to boots. Flares stacked with paperwork. My spare uniform folded neatly on the bottom shelf, laid out as if prepared for use. I backed away and closed the door without touching the handle. The restroom light was on. It hadn't been earlier. I approached it slowly, heart thudding, and nudged the door open with my foot. The room was empty, sink dry, toilet untouched. The mirror above the sink was fogged over from the inside, condensation beating along its surface despite the room being cold. Something had written in the fog. Not words. Shapes. Rough outlines of a face, erased and redrawn multiple times, as if practicing. The proportions shifted between attempts. Eyes too far apart, mouth too low, jaw too narrow. On the final version, the features were close. Close enough to make my stomach turn. Smiled. I wiped the mirror clean with my sleeve, hard enough to squeak glass, and turned away before anything else could appear. The emergency hatch ladder was my last option. If I could reach the roof, maybe I could signal. Maybe line of sight would help. Maybe whatever was happening was contained by walls, rules it needed structures to follow. I didn't fully believe that, but belief wasn't required. Movement was. I approached the hatch, careful, listening. Nothing reacted. No footsteps. No whispering. The station felt almost calm, like a predator that had already eaten and was resting. The ladder rattled softly as I climbed. Each rung felt too loud. Halfway up, I paused, listening for pursuit. Nothing came. I pushed the hatch open. Cold air rushed in, sharp and clean compared to the station's stale warmth. I hauled myself onto the roof and closed the hatch behind me, sitting there for a moment with my back against it, breathing hard. The fog was worse up here. It moved fast, rolling over the treetops in heavy waves, swallowing distance. I could see maybe 30 feet in any direction before everything disappeared into gray. The forest was gone. The mountains were gone. It felt like the world ended just beyond the edge of the roof. I stood and scanned anyway. That's when I saw the footprints. They led across the roof from the opposite side, deep impressions in the thin layer of moisture that hadn't been there when I climbed up. They stopped several feet away from me, facing me. The fog shifted. A shape emerged, not climbing, not arriving, just resolving. It stood upright, tall and narrow, its outline sharper in the open air. Without the distortion of glass or walls, I could see it more clearly, and that made it worse. Its surface was not skin, not fur, not anything I could name. It looked like compressed shadow, dense and matte, swallowing light without reflecting it. The proportions were almost human, almost familiar, and that was the most unsettling part. Tilted its head. The motion was perfect. "I can go farther now," it said. The voice was mine again, fully mine. No hesitation, no echo. "You showed me," it continued, "the edges, the openings." I stepped back until my heel hit the roof's edge. Wind tugged at my jacket. The fog closed in tighter, muffling sound, isolating us in a small, floating pocket of space. "You don't belong here," I said, the words automatic, meaningless. "Considered that. This place belongs to patterns," it replied. "You are one." Took a step closer. The roof creaked under its weight. Not cracked, creaked, as if acknowledging it. I realized then that it wasn't trying to replace me. It was trying to leave with me. The station lights flickered below, visible through the hatch seam. Somewhere inside, a radio turned on. My voice carried up through the structure, steady and calm. "Ranger Station, this is Daniel Mercer. Routine check complete. All systems normal." The thing looked past me, toward the fog. "Daylight is ending," it said. "You always go back before dark." The sun dimmed further, light draining fast as the fog thickened into something almost solid. I had minutes at best. I made a decision, not a good one, but the only one that felt like it was still mine. I stepped forward instead of back. The thing paused. That was the first real hesitation I'd seen from it, and the realization struck me with a jolt of clarity sharp enough to cut through the fear. It understood retreat. It understood patterns. It expected me to follow the same ones I always had. What it didn't understand, what it couldn't predict, was deviation. I moved toward it slowly, hands open, palms visible, the way you approach a cornered animal. The roof creaked under my weight, moisture slick beneath my boots. The fog pressed in tighter, swallowing the edges of my vision until there was nothing but the two of us and the narrow strip of roof between. Its outline wavered, not fading, adjusting. "You don't need to do this," it said. My voice layered perfectly now, calm and reasonable. "The station will function. I can keep it safe." "That's not your job," I said. The words felt thin, but saying them grounded me. The station was a place, not a role. I was the one who gave it meaning, or at least I had been. It tilted its head again, slower this time. The gesture was so practiced it made my stomach twist. Somewhere in the building below us, something clicked. Maybe a relay, maybe a switch being thrown by hands that no longer needed instructions. "I can do what you do," it said. "I already am." The lights beneath the roof flickered in response, steadying into a consistent glow. The generator, dead hours earlier, rumbled back to life with a confidence that did not belong to it. I shook my head. "No," I said. "You can repeat it. That's not the same thing." The thing leaned closer, and the air between us grew heavy, charged. My skin prickled, every nerve firing at once. The fog around its shape folded inward, clinging to it, drawn by something I couldn't see. "Then show me," it said. I understood then what it wanted. Not permission, not obedience, completion. It had learned the routines, the language, the structure. What it lacked was the final step, the moment of transition, the decision that marked the end of a shift, the leaving of a place behind. Something it could not do alone. I thought of the logbook, the way it had written entries that mimicked mine but never quite closed the day. I thought of the doors it opened politely, the way it waited instead of forcing. It wasn't bound by the station. It was bound by me. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my keys. The metal felt absurdly solid in my hand. Grounding. Real. "I'm ending my shift," I said. The thing went very still. "That isn't scheduled," it replied. "Schedules change," I said. "You should know that by now." I walked past it. The fog screamed. Not audibly, not in a way that carried sound, but in pressure, in resistance, in a sudden tightening that made it hard to breathe. The thing turned sharply, its outline distorting, stretching toward me like a shadow cast by a moving light. "Come back," it said, urgency bleeding into the words for the first time. "You haven't logged it." I ignored it and climbed back down through the hatch, dropping into the station with shaking legs. The interior lights were fully on now, bright enough to hurt my eyes. The radio blared my voice on repeat, cycling through check-ins and status reports, all calm, all reassuring. I crossed the room in a straight line, not looking left or right, and stopped at the desk. The logbook lay open, waiting. The pen was warm when I picked it up. My hand shook as I wrote, but the words came easily, familiar muscle memory guiding each letter. 15:58. End of shift. Station secured. Ranger departing location. The moment I finished the last word, the building shuddered. Not violently, not like an earthquake, like a breath being released. The lights dimmed, then returned to their normal, tired glow. The radio went silent. The generator's hum softened, settling into a rhythm I recognized. Behind me, something moved fast. I turned. The thing was halfway down the ladder, forcing itself through the hatch in a way it hadn't before, its shape warping to fit, edges scraping against metal. It looked wrong outside the roof now, compressed and unstable, its outline fraying. "You can't leave," it said, the voice breaking for the first time. "This place doesn't belong to either of us," I said. I grabbed my jacket, my pack, anything within reach, and headed for the front door. The handle was cold, familiar. For a terrifying half-second, it resisted. Then it turned. I stepped outside. The fog parted just enough to show the gravel lot, the trees, the narrow road leading down the mountain. Dusk bled across the sky, the last of the daylight slipping away fast. Behind me, the station groaned, wood and metal protesting as something inside moved too quickly, too desperately. I didn't look back. I walked down the road, away from the building, away from the patterns that had defined my life for over a decade. The fog followed me for a while, brushing at my heels, whispering my name in my own voice. Then it stopped. When I finally dared to turn, the ranger station was gone. Not hidden, gone. The trees stood where it had been, unbroken, undisturbed, as if the building had never existed at all. My radio crackled to life one last time. A voice came through, steady, professional. Appalachian Ranger Station reporting. Routine check complete. All systems normal. The transmission ended. I kept walking. I reached the main road just after sunset. The fog thinned the farther I went downhill, breaking apart into low patches that hugged the ground instead of swallowing it whole. By the time I saw the reflective marker nailed into the first roadside tree, my legs were trembling from exhaustion, adrenaline burning off in painful waves. I stopped there, hands on my knees, forcing myself to breathe until the world stopped spinning. The ranger station was still gone. I checked behind me 3 times, half expecting it to reappear the moment I stopped moving. But the forest remained unchanged, dense, dark, and quiet in the way only untouched woods can be. No gravel lot, no roofline, no antenna cutting into the sky. Just trees that had probably been standing there longer than the station ever had. My radio stayed silent. That scared me more than when it had spoken. I continued down the road until my phone picked up a weak signal. 1 bar, flickering, but enough. I called regional dispatch directly. The line rang twice before someone answered. A real person. I could hear breathing, paper shuffling, the faint hum of an office background. I gave my name. There was a pause. Then the dispatcher asked me to repeat it. I did, slower, spelling my last name without being prompted. The silence that followed stretched long enough to make my skin prickle. She told me, carefully, that my station had been decommissioned 3 years ago. Not closed for the day. Not understaffed. Removed. According to their records, the Appalachian substation I described had been dismantled after structural failures made it unsafe. The site had been cleared. No active assignment. No utilities. No logs. No ranger posted there since. She asked me where I was calling from. I told her the mile marker. That part at least matched reality. They sent a vehicle anyway. While I waited, sitting on the guardrail in the fading light, I tried to piece the day together. The timestamps still made sense on my watch. The hours added up. I remembered the weight of the pen in my hand, the sound of the roof creaking, the cold where something had touched me. I checked my arm where it had brushed past. A faint discoloration lingered there, like a bruise seen through foggy glass. It didn't hurt. It just felt numb. The ranger truck arrived just after full dark. 2 officers stepped out, flashlights sweeping the trees, hands resting near their belts in a way that told me dispatch hadn't told them everything, just enough to make them cautious. They listened while I talked. They didn't interrupt. One of them wrote notes. The other watched the forest the entire time. They drove me to the regional office. Inside, under fluorescent lights, the story sounded less believable even to me. Old maps were pulled, digital records checked, satellite imagery brought up on a screen. The clearing where the station should have been showed nothing but uninterrupted canopy. No access road, no concrete foundation, nothing. They offered explanations. Stress. fatigue, a misremembered assignment, a clerical error compounded by isolation. One of them suggested I might have been working out of a temporary structure and misidentified it. I didn't argue. I handed over my keys. The ring was lighter than it should have been. They told me to take the night off. Mandatory leave until things could be sorted out. A ride home was arranged. I sat in the passenger seat of another truck, watching the forest slide past, every shadow making my muscles tense. Nothing followed me. That should have been comforting. It wasn't. When I got home, well after midnight, I showered until the water ran cold. I scrubbed the smell of damp stone from my skin, but it lingered faintly, clinging to the back of my nose. I checked my phone compulsively, half expecting messages I hadn't sent or calls I didn't remember making. There were none. I didn't sleep. Just before dawn, my phone buzzed once. No number, no caller ID, a voicemail. I stared at it for a long time before opening it. Static filled the first few seconds. Then a familiar hum, a generator settling into rhythm, papers shifting, pen touching paper. My voice came through, calm, professional, exactly as it had sounded 1,000 times before. 15:58, it said. End of shift. Station secured. There was a pause. A second voice layered underneath mine. Not distorted, not monstrous, just quieter. Still learning, it said. The message ended. I changed my number that morning. I resigned 2 weeks later. I no longer work as a ranger. I avoid patterns now. I leave lights on in rooms I'm not using. I don't follow the same route home twice in a row. When I sign my name, I vary my handwriting slightly each time. Sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet and the air feels too still, I hear a familiar sound. Paper turning slowly, patiently. And I know somewhere, in a place that remembers shapes and routines better than it remembers people, something is keeping watch.